the system as a whole will be healthier if we hear from more parts of the system. It's this idea that nobody has a monopoly on the truth. And so we actually need as many people as possible sharing their point of view so that we can make good decisions. Because otherwise, we don't see the whole picture, and no one will ever see the whole picture. So I think encouraging as well that your part of the puzzle is really important. So I think it's also facilitators or leaders of conversations have opportunities then to invite participation, and then you end up kind of having a much better picture of what's going on and what's possible.
Hey folks, what's happening? Welcome to Your Forest. My name is Matthew Kristof, and on this podcast, we talk about the environment and the science of sustainability. Now, today's episode is actually a part 2 in a way. So last episode, we dived into understanding conflict, understanding dialogue. How does dialogue fit into landscape management? Okay. How do we have better conversations so we can do better management, essentially? This episode, we're diving deeper into that. Labeling this one Mastering Conflict. Even though it's not specifically about conflict, it's about dialogue, it's about relationships, it's about empathy and understanding each other. This episode, we're doing a deep dive on the tools you need to be a better communicator. How can you better advocate for yourself, for your organization? How can you understand the needs of others, people that you're going to be in collaboration with, in cooperation with? How can you move change forward, right? By understanding the comprehensive picture that is the complexity of landscape management, right? You can only do that through understanding others, through dialogue, and we're going to give you the tools to do it properly here today. So in order to have this conversation, we brought back James Whitehead. He is the Special Projects Manager for the Mitigating Wildfires Project at Simon Fraser University, Morris J. Wask Center for Dialogue. Long title, but very cool. He is also an ex-wildland firefighter, and he also has his master's in exploring the impacts of wildfire on rural communities. And that brought him to the Center for Dialogue. In addition, we brought on Dr. Robin Freeman. Dr. Robin Freeman, she is a project manager of the Wildfire Networks at the Mitigating Wildfires Project at the Simon Fraser University Center for Dialogue. Her research explored democratic and equitable approaches to adult learning. She also teaches a dialogue, facilitation, and conflict engagement course at SFU. So with the two of them, we were able to do a deep dive on how to have these conversations, hard conversations. In landscape management, we've got people coming from conservation, First Nations, we've got rural communities, we have forest industry, we have oil and gas, we have ranchers, we have farmers, we have, power lines, we have water, we have all these different values and perspectives on how things should be done. And there's a bit of conflict there. So if we want to move forward into a world where we're doing comprehensive and dynamic landscape planning, something that moves with the landscape as it changes over time, then we need to all be having conversations all the time. I see this as being a fundamental skill for anybody that is going to be in the environmental management space, in forestry and conservation, biology, and wildfire, any of those things. You're going to need to know how to build good relationships, have good conversations, and you're going to need to know how to work with people that you disagree with and don't like. You're just going to have to. And today's conversation is going to help you be able to do that. So, sponsors for this episode, West Fraser is the #1 sponsor for 2025. Without them, this would not be possible. Thank you, West Fraser, for your unwavering support. I really, really appreciate it. Could not do it without you. Also, Greenlink Forestry has been with me since the beginning. Thank you, Greenlink. Now, let's dive into this conversation with Robin and James, all about being better communicators, dialogue, conflict management, or should I say conflict engagement? Here we go. Conflict is an opportunity, as Robin has said in this conversation. Here we go. So first of all, thank you to both of you for taking the time to do this. I love having these discussions. They're my favorite part of my month, to be able to sit down and dive deeply into the human mind and our thoughts and ideas about nature, and today more about ourselves, I guess. So I'm excited to do one of these deep dives. So first of all, before we get into anything, want to get to know both of you a little bit. James, you were in the last episode, but we'll do it again. Yes, maybe starting with James. Just give us a little rundown of your current role and how it is that you came to dedicate this part of your life, at least, to helping people communicate more effectively.
Yeah, so I work for the SFU Centre for Dialogue and the Mitigating Wildfire Initiative, and my background has basically been all fires. So I worked as a wildland firefighter on a unit crew in northern BC for 7 years, and then I did my graduate research looking at how wildfire impacts rural communities and how we can better communicate with rural communities on issues such as building resilience and wildfire mitigation, and really engaging groups that are maybe a little bit more reluctant to participate in government-sponsored programs. And so through there, once that finished, I stumbled across the Mitigating Wildfire Initiative, which is this really cool effort to apply the skills of dialogue and engagement and facilitation to the challenge of wildfire mitigation in BC. And that really excited me. I'm not a facilitator by training until this job, but I really came from the wildfire side, where I saw that so many of the challenges we were facing, both in the suppression world and the mitigation world, we're so reliant on communication and bringing people into the fold. And we see this playing out in things like evacuation reluctance, but also misinformation and social media around fire. And I think that fundamental element of communication directed at the challenge of wildfires in BC was really what drew me to this space.
Yeah, totally. It's all about people, right? And how we misunderstand each other and how we sort through all that. Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, all land management is people management, right? So yeah, that's great. Thanks, James. Appreciate it. And and in the previous episode, if you want to know a deeper dive on James, you can go back to that one, because we dove deep into the into the lore that is James Whitehead.
Oh, that's how crazy.
Right. And so yeah, Robin, please just give us the rundown what your current role is, and how you came to dedicate this part of your life to helping people communicate more effectively.
Great. Thanks, Matt. It's really great to be with you today. Thanks for the opportunity to chat. So my name is Robin Freeman, and I work with James at the Mitigating Wildfire Initiative. I started in 2023, coming to Canada and what we call BC from the States via Germany. So my path to wildfire is really different than James. My background is not in wildfire at all. I come more from a dialogical background, dialogical education, and also an arts and culture background. So my, special flavor of dialogue is influenced a lot by music making.
Oh.
And what happens specifically when we make music together, and how that's its own form of communication and dialogue. And that's kind of how I got interested in what is this thing that we call dialogue? How does it work? How does it enable groups to work better together? So for me, coming into my role at the Center for Dialogue, I am bringing some lenses from education and from music making, which makes our conversations, I think, James, pretty interesting because James is definitely the subject matter expert. And so we have a lot, I think, to learn from each other. And it's been great working on this project with so many interesting and amazing people over the past year and a half.
That's awesome. That's an awesome example of dialogue that you just said, like the idea of music. Like I was just thinking about that. Like I used to play a little bit of music back when I was in university. And when you get into like a jam session with somebody, right? Like you're with like 3 or 4 different people, and you could spend like 4 hours playing music, and it's fun, it's good. But all of a sudden you all hit this certain, I don't know, brainwave, and you're all thinking the same thing, and you're all kind of just like helping each other out, and everything comes together. You're feeling the vibes, and it's all of a sudden everybody understands exactly what everyone else is going to do, and it's totally organic, and it's totally, I don't know, it's just this, everyone's on the same brainwave, right? And that's a great way to explain the depth of what dialogue is relative to just communication or conversation, right? Like dialogue is that like real true understanding, that's cool. I like that. That's an interesting
Yeah. And to kind of maybe add an extra layer to that, Matt, you're talking about something that a researcher, a social scientist back in the 50s coined a term called tuning in. And he observed chamber orchestras and small groups of musicians learning and kind of tuning in physically to what was happening to the music making in the moment. And exactly what you're describing, this kind of way that everything else falls away. Mm-hmm. I know exactly what you're going to do next. I know exactly how loud you're going to play. I know what you're feeling. All of this kind of thing. It's this phenomenon now that's called tuning in. And I think we also see this in regular conversations when maybe time stands still, or you feel like you're encountering someone in their fullest humanity, and it's kind of shocking and transcendent at the same time.
Totally.
So I think there are definitely similarities when we're just kind of using verbal forms of communication, as well as when we're communicating with other forms like music making.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know that it's exactly the same thing, but I guess if someone plays a lot of sports or something and you're kind of in the zone, I don't think it's the same as that, because that's like more you're in tune with yourself and you're totally understand yourself and what you're going to do, and everything's just coming right. It's like that, but as a group, right? And it's amazing when that stuff happens. It's like that's where life happens, right?
I think the one common theme across all of those is there's a kind of, I find in all those states where you might have, say, a flow state with sports, whether it's individual or with teams, whether it's with music, or these sort of conversations that we're having, is really finding that inflection point that really kind of disrupts a normal conversation in some way, shape, or form. And I think there's a very much kind of, in all of those examples, there's a binary where it's happening or it's not. And I think that's been really interesting to see with our work, where all of a sudden conversations really switch and then they start to progress in a very different way. And it's still that clear binary that I don't think I really appreciated before I came into the space.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing idea. And it's funny how it takes stepping back from the content and stepping back from your own expectations to recognize that space. Almost, you know what I mean? Like you need to be free of expectations in order to actually experience it. And it's it's a fascinating idea. And I can't believe, like, I think I've kind of dabbled around this idea my whole career and never really pinpointed it, never really landed on it up until very recently. And so now I'm excited to dive into it and explore what this is. And my intentions for today are, so the conversation James and I had, the dialogue James and I had previously on the previous episode, we were really introducing dialogue and really introducing some of these basic ideas of, like, we focused a lot around the idea of landscape resilience and how people have different perspectives on that. People have, if you're talking about landscape resilience or wildfire resilience, how everybody is talking, they might be saying the same words, but they're thinking about and talking about something very different, and how when you all come together, it can be very confusing when it doesn't seem like you're agreeing because you're actually talking about the same thing. And so we kind of explored that, right? The complexity of dialogue. And what I wanted to do today is to discuss how to host effective dialogue, right? I wanted to give listeners the tools, because a lot of people that listen are either students or are landscape managers themselves, or in this space, in this collaborative space. And they're encountering this stuff all the time, right? They're at a round table with a bunch of different people from different points of view, different stakeholders, and you're trying to get to some solution, but it's hard. So I want to try and walk away today with maybe providing some how-tos, maybe providing just a little bit more ideas of where people how they can start to do this, right? That's my intention for today. And so, yeah, I want to dive into this. So I think we've touched a little bit on dialogue and kind of what it is, but I want to give Robin an opportunity to dive into it, because you haven't had that chance to really explain what it is to you, how you see it, how you feel it. And so, yeah, I want to give you the opportunity to explain what dialogue is for you and why it's important.
What a great question. I think for me, dialogue is a way of being. I think it's how we relate to each other and relate to ourselves. It's how we make sense of the world. And I think we have these meetings and encounters all of our lives long, right? We're in contact with other people. We're in contact with the more than human. And all of these different meetings provide us with an opportunity to see things from a different perspective and to develop kind of an understanding that goes beyond our own current limits. So I think for me, dialogue is something that it's relational, but it's kind of embedded in who we are as human beings. It is something that we are all capable of doing. I think it's also many other things. You could talk about it as a skill. You could talk about it as an art. It's a practice. It's all of these different things. And this is the literature on dialogue, the definitions that are out there for dialogue. You can find any definition you want for dialogue, really. So there are many different ways one can go about discovering their own way of hosting dialogue or what dialogue means to them. I really appreciate that opportunity to kind of craft it for oneself and figure out then how it applies to one's life as you keep stepping into dialogical spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. You're like, it's just us being genuine.
It's just us being human beings.
Yeah. Which is interesting that you have to say that, right? That like we've through our societal interactions, we're forced to somehow adjust our genuine nature to, for whatever reason. And so this actually having dialogue is just removing that. That's interesting. I like that. That's great.
Yeah. And I think it also it to maybe respond to that as well. There's a philosophy of dialogue that has deeply influenced kind of how I practice dialogue and understand it. Martin Buber, who in 1923, he was a Jewish philosopher, wrote this beautiful book, which in German is Ich und Du, but it translates to I and Thou. And it's this idea of kind of trying to understand how dialogue is embedded in our way of being and what it does. And he talks about how we have these kinds of different modes of being in the world. And one, I think this is what you're talking about, Matt, is this kind of sense making that we do through our five senses as we walk through the world. We're kind of categorizing things. We're understanding this object over here. And it helps us kind of make sense of how do we move through the physical and social spaces that we're in together. And it brings a level of understanding and comfort, right? Like, I know that's an apple over there. I know that my kid's bedroom is back there. These very simple ways of naming.
Yeah.
And we need that kind of understanding of the world because if we didn't, it would be chaos for us.
Right.
And so we do have this kind of mode of being. But then in addition, there's this kind of other recognition of the other beings in the world also as equal subjectivities. I feel like that doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's that I recognize that I am an I, and I recognize that you are also an I.
Yes.
And so we have we go back and forth between these two modes of experiencing the world and interacting with each other. And we need both of them. The I and thou, when I recognize that you're another human being, you're not an object,
yes,
helps us become more fully human. But we still need these kinds of I and it relationships to help us make sense of our world and move through it.
Totally.
And part of, I think, what dialogue can do is help us move between these two modes and kind of get a lot out of that second mode where we're recognizing you're also a human being with your own kind of fully human qualities.
Totally. Yeah. Not every moment can be this like deep dissection of like, what is life? Right. So sometimes you have to have, that's a banana. That is a table. That is a person. And like, but yeah, I really like that idea of, the philosophy of dialogue, the it, like I, and then everything else besides me is an object versus I, thou, and like everything else, not just people, but like trees and rocks and everything else is also an I or a thou, or it's a being that is equally as important and should be equally as respected as I am, which is just empathy, right? It's just recognizing that you're not the center of the universe, but we have such a problem with that because I am the center of my universe. No matter what, I always see everything, experience everything through this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting that we spend so much time trying to counteract that and trying to include in ourselves, the greater being that is everything. And so it's yeah, but I really appreciated that perspective, right? It seems like a lot of this diving into a lot of the concepts of dialogue, that's really what it is just like, can you step outside of yourself for a second and just respond without your preconceived notions, right? It's just like, can you just step out of your ego for a moment and let's see what we can do here. Let's see how we can get the ball rolling, which I love. Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think that element of suspending, I'm going to suspend my judgment. I'm going to suspend, I know that it's there, but I'm going to suspend it for a moment in the conversation to really listen and really understand what this person is saying, but also kind of who they are beyond, the values that we might share or might not share, or the different ideas that we have.
Yes. I like that too, because that points out the fact that like, hey, you don't need to be an enlightened being. You don't need to be Buddha to do this, right? We recognize that everybody makes judgments. Like we all judge everybody and everything all the time. That's just the way our brains work. But if we're able to recognize those judgments and maybe put them aside or recognize them for what they are, which is judgments and not a true representation of that thing or person, then all of a sudden, so like everyone can do that, right? They can. Yeah. So it's not like you need to be enlightened to do this. You just need to try. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. I really liked I think it was Boober in the resources you sent me. He just, or maybe it wasn't him. It was the gentleman that was talking about Boober in the video. And I'll link that video because it was a great video. I'll link it in the show notes for people. And he had said that true debate can only happen when disagreeing parties can understand each other so completely that they could describe the other's motivations and give it the most, and this is the important part, the most charitable explanation imaginable, to the point where you could allow the other person to say, yes, that's what I mean. That's what I'm talking about. So you totally understand that person's motivation, where they're coming from. And only then can you give fair critique. And only then can you actually start to have real dialogue and a real deep conversation about what you mean and the merits of those ideas, right? And I thought that was great. Just like understanding that, like, hey, a real debate is not like, it's not a political debate like we see so often, right? Where it's just two people spouting their ideas and calling the other person an idiot. We're talking about like, can we sit down and respect each other enough to try to actually understand? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've seen that happen in some of our work, right, James? We've seen those moments kind of, you move away from the communication style of debate to the communication style of dialogue.
Cool.
Because dialogue isn't about convincing someone else. It's really what you're saying, Matt. It's about really trying to understand how this person is thinking this or feeling this. And in dialogue, we don't try to convince someone that I'm right or that you're right. It's really about the understanding. And from there, we may need to move on to other communication styles, like we may need to debate something. We
Right.
may need to make a decision about something. But I would say those are kind of different ways of hosting a conversation than a dialogue is.
Right.
I think one of the fundamental pieces that's really important to remember too is we are often trying to have conversations that are not attached to a specific outcome, like Robin just said. But when we think about that, we really mean like not attached to what are we doing with this area or this block next month? What are we doing with this specific policy or piece of legislation? We're trying to have much more abstract, I think, conversations that are a bit more values driven. Where a good example of this might be we are looking at whether we're preserving a block or logging it, but those seem diametrically opposed. And when we get into a values-driven conversation, maybe there's an avenue where the values are focused, like there's shared values in the local wildlife objectives and how we can really sort of plan this work around supporting the key objectives of those that were opposed to it. And so I think that's maybe a bit more of a tangible example than we usually deal with. But I think a lot of the time, those deeper underlying values don't come up in a more targeted conversation related to a specific outcome. Or if we're having a more abstract conversation, we can really see what the key motivators are from the different parties involved. And I really think back to a conversation that we did a while back, and we ended up basically using what's called a fishbowl technique, where we had a conversation between two people in front of 30 others who were not allowed to participate, and just had to sit there and listen and really hear someone's perspective that was quite different from their own. And I think even just understanding where the fundamental values behind the opposite side of that conflict came from was really, really impactful for that conversation, because it's something that we just don't do when there's a specific outcome or a specific oppositional negotiation on the line.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a chance to sort of step back from those outcomes and really have a conversation about the values that we're bringing into this discussion, which I think are often a lot more shared for people working in this space, even on opposite sides of a debate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that example, James. And I think also wildfire is one of these problems that's complex, right? It's not a simple problem like a recipe. It's not a complicated problem like building a rocket ship where there are a couple of right ways we could go about doing it. We're working in a space where there could be many solutions, but we're really trying to build emergent solutions. So that aspect of being able to hear and understand how people are seeing their part of the puzzle is sort of the only way to move forward when there are so many unknowns, right?
I think, too, one of the interesting things about wildfire, which makes it maybe somewhat unique, is the end state is probably pretty commonly shared. Like our desired end goal in addressing the risk of wildfires, I don't think there's much discrepancy, where I think the vast majority of people would like to get back to forests with healthy fire regimes, would like to get back to sort of supporting natural systems and living on the land with natural systems. But there's these huge challenges in the implementation phase and how we get back to the place where we can really pursue those goals. And I think it's a really powerful asset with fire and the work that we do, where we can consider that final vision or that end goal vision is pretty common and uncontroversial. And I think that's something that's deeply, it's a huge asset for the work we're doing, because it would be really, really tough if those end game or end state visions were diametrically opposed. So fire is a really cool example in that case.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I just had a thought trying to put all of this quite simply. And it sounded like, James, like what you were saying is that right now in kind of forest landscape planning and wildfire mitigation and all this type of stuff, we're looking at solutions. We're like, hey, how do we solve this problem, this particular issue? How do we solve this particular issue? And we got all these voices and there's too much noise. And what we're saying is, hey, we haven't even built the relationships between us in order to understand each other well enough to actually have the discussion about what the solution could possibly be. So you're saying, it sounds to me at least like you're saying, hey, we need to step back and start to understand each other, and then we can step back into this space of how do we solve the problem. And I get the feeling that probably feels like backpedaling to a lot of people, and might feel like a lot of just spinning your wheels and like, hey, let's do something, when it's like, hey, we would love to, we want to do that, but we have to create trust and understanding before we do that. Is that fair to say? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think there's two things that really come to mind there. The first is Dr. Paul Hesburgh out of the U.S. Forest Service in Eastern Washington, and he really has this idea that we need to have values-driven landscape plans. So rather, our government planning processes have become so focused on addressing every variable. So we might have a landscape plan that's 200, 500,000 pages, and really focused on being prescriptive in every single situation. And Paul's idea is maybe we need to be looking at, say, those 10-page landscape plans, which really prescribe values. And that's obviously much, much easier said than done. But I think that's a really interesting idea where we're often trying to write these catch-all plans or policies or legislation, or both at the government level, but also at the industry or First Nations stewardship plans, XYZ, that are really trying to cover every conceivable situation or thing that happens without maybe understanding or having a clear idea of the shared values that go into that. And so taking a step back and thinking about how we want our landscape to be managed, and right there might be a lot more commonality than the specific implementation. So obviously much easier said than done to move in that direction, but I think it really highlights the point you're trying to make there of kind of that relational land management. And then the other piece I think too is you talked about building those relationships, and I really liked how you framed it there, where we're trying to build relationships without fundamentally understanding the values that people are coming into a conversation with. The only thing I would add is that we're also trying to repair relationships where if we can demonstrate and highlight shared values, and I think often conservation and forestry is a great example of this, where we have some foresters that are deeply, deeply committed to protecting the landscapes that they're working on. They're deeply aware of some of the challenges with the industry, but at the same time, they speak in a very different language from, say, those conservation groups that they might be in an oppositional position with. And so really, once again, highlighting those shared values and letting groups uncover those shared values before they get into a land management negotiation or a plan, because we start people off on an oppositional footing, and then we're making these deeply impactful decisions in a way that will never works to address that oppositional footing.
Yeah, connection before content, right? You need that connection point before you can dive into the conflict or discover what the conflict really is at the root, right?
Yeah. No, that's interesting. It does encapsulate kind of the whole land management crux right now, kind of where we're kind of held up, right? We're held up in this idea of we're not really sure where to go. And we have so many, like to your point, James, we have so many incredibly smart people with lots of good ideas. And then we're creating possibly these overcomplicated plans that is just like, it's too much to go through. But like, yeah, having something that's more like, hey, is there like some ideas we can just keep in mind while we're going through, land management activities, that we can just keep those ideas in mind, and that will help guide us through how to deal with this, instead of being like, okay, in this situation, the plan says that we will do this, 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 and this, and because of these reasons, and then we become very prescriptive again, and we're not going with the flow. We're not, you know what I mean? We're kind of, again, taking our thinking out of it, and we're starting to just be like, hey, the book says this, so that's what we'll do. So I like that idea of, we have all these smart people, good intentions, everyone's trying to do everything all at once, and it's just getting jumbled, and we're getting caught in the gears there, and it's kind of slowing us down. And yeah, Paul Hesburgh's idea of value-driven plans seems, you know what it seems like? It feels like a fresh breath air. It just feels like, oh, okay, I don't need to be sitting here worried about all the specific policies. I can just be like, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? What are the values at stake? And like, how do we do this? And just start thinking through it like a human being and not like a computer. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really, really interesting. And I would love to see that happen, to see those relationships start to be built in a way where there is no more finger pointing, right? And there is just like, hey, let's work together here, because the shared values are immense. We just kind of fail to recognize that, I think. So speaking of conflict, so in these situations, we can imagine that a lot of times there's a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. And if you're trying to manage these big ideas, there's going to be conflicting views. So they're going to have conflict. I particularly liked one of the links you sent me, Robin, regarding deep democracy and the ideas of conflict as an opportunity. Which was really, really interesting, because conflict, the word in and of itself, to me, just means bad, right? Like bad, conflict, bad thing. Don't do that. Stay away, right? Like it's this big red flag of like, don't do conflict, bad. And to hear someone go, well, I mean, conflict is just where two very passionate or more people are just arguing passionately about something they care about. And you're like, why is that bad? And you're like, wait, you're right. Let's take a step back. Why is conflict bad? Why do we see conflict as a bad thing? As long as we can be mature about it and we can do what we've been talking about this whole time, like step out of ourselves for a second, step out of our ego, then all of a sudden conflict becomes an opportunity. So I want to dive into that concept a little bit, because I think that's a crucially important idea for folks that are going into spaces where they know they're going to a meeting, they know there's going to be conflicting views, there's going to be conflict, and how they can, what mind space they can be in order to handle that effectively, and it be, an effective and successful meeting, and not just one where everyone's pulling their hair out thinking, why don't you understand?
Yeah, I hear that. James, I really want to hear your thoughts on this. Maybe just first to respond a little bit about the deep democracy method. The video that I had shared with you is showing Myrna Lewis, who is the creator of this Lewis deep democracy method, which is based on strategies and approaches that were used in post-apartheid South Africa. And she, in this video, really talks, like you said, about mining the gold of conflict. I love that phrase. And as someone who identifies as a conflict-averse person, I feel like there are probably a lot of us out there who might identify that way. We fear saying what needs to be said because we worry about judgment, we worry about relationships falling apart. We're just not sure how we're going to come across. I think some people enjoy fighting, but that doesn't actually resolve the issue. It just creates winners and losers, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, Matt, about when we go into debate mode, we have somebody who's right and we have someone who's wrong. And that's the point of debate, is to do that. So what conflict kind of offers us is an opportunity to see what's some of the wisdom underneath the conflict. What are the real feelings that are going on here? And how can we use conflict to say the things that really need to be said? Because all of us have some kind of wisdom to contribute when it comes to understanding what the problem is or what the issue is. But James, I don't know if you have anything to add on that line there.
Yeah, I think we inherently shy away from conflict, and it's even in a facilitation course a while back. I remember we had a kind of crowdsourced thing about what makes a good discussion, and the things that came up were respect, listening to each other, being conciliatory, XYZ, and I think it's so hard for us to fit conflict into that narrative of what makes a good discussion that sometimes it sort of has to be poked and prodded, because being respectful is great, but not if it's at the expense of what people are actually trying to say. Because I think there are times where you leave a workshop or a discussion or a conversation and you sort of, it's felt empty, where everything has sort of stayed at that surface level, and sometimes that conflict needs to be poked and prodded a little bit, or delved a bit deeper into. And it's like Robin, as someone that's fairly conflict averse, it's not an easy thing to do, but I think providing an avenue that's safe enough and comfortable enough where people feel okay going into that more conflict-laden space is really, really important. So I think it's not something to shy away from, and it's something to really be conscious of supporting. And even through, I would say, this work, I've become much more comfortable speaking up, because I think I see more and more how important it can be and how important it is. And yeah, it's one thing to be respectful. It's one thing to be very conscientious of others' needs. It's one thing to be very focused on maintaining a collaborative, respectful conversation. But if that comes at the expense of what you truly want to say and what the underlying issue is, then it's not worth it.
Totally. I also think it's disrespectful to not point out when somebody might be missing something, right? Because that's an opportunity for them to also grow and learn, or you to grow and learn. And if, like, there are truths in this world, right? And if you're just being respectful and let somebody say their truth, but you're not challenging them where your truths are misaligned, that's an opportunity for both of you to kind of see a different side and to grow and to learn, right? So like that's truly representative of the truth, is when you can, hey, I don't agree with that, and let's get into that, right? Like I think that's a huge, I know it's conflict, but I think that, like you said, like Robin said, there's these nuggets of truth in there where we're going to have different perspectives. And if we can, those are the times when it's uncomfortable, that's when those nuggets can come out and be shown the light of day. And then you can discuss them and you can be like, oh, all of a sudden you have a new understanding, right? But we can't be afraid of speaking up. And I'm the same way. I'm not one to like often speak up in a meeting and say something that I think is, maybe missing the point. But, I think, the courage is needed to do those things, because that's how we actually move forward and don't get stuck in these ruts of non-action.
Yeah, absolutely. I think collaboration has to make a place for fighting.
Yeah.
We have to kind of move away from this rosy idea that collaboration always means that we're always going to be all aligned, we're always going to agree, we're going to be a team, we're all going to agree on what the problem is and the solution and the plan. It's all under control. And that's not really how, at least for me, most collaborations that I've been a part of, they've got some tension. There's like some spice and some heat there. And when we don't allow that to kind of blossom, we lose an opportunity, I think. But totally. I think this is also where I feel so privileged and grateful to have learned about many different facilitation techniques and methods, and just kind of how do you hold space for these kinds of conversations? What does the container look like that you're trying to build so this conversation has, it has some structure?
Right.
Those little things can help make it possible for people to express their views, for people to feel brave together. And we're never going to get anywhere if we can't express our differences.
Totally.
I think we're living in a moment in time where we're kind of seeing this play out. And the value of facilitation practice is that it gives us some tools to express our differences in a way that people don't get irreparably damaged, or that we can make the conflict produce something for us. And it might be uncomfortable, but discomfort, we also have to just normalize that having tough conversations, it's going to feel uncomfortable. And that we can do that. We can sit in discomfort together.
Totally. I liked the way James put it in our last recording. You said how to disagree effectively. Was that what you said? I think something like that. It's like we're learning how to disagree effectively. And I think what I liked about that is the idea that like conflict doesn't have to be disrespectful. You can be upset about something and it not be at that person. It can be about the idea, and it can be about like, hey, I want to discuss this. Let's get into it. It doesn't have to be disrespectful, right? Like there's right and wrong ways to go into conflict, right? Like name calling's not great. Let's stay away from the high school style drama. Let's be adults. And it's funny how opposed we are to that, right? How opposed we are to just like, it's more comfortable to just sit back, let the person say something you disagree with, and just move on with your day, and just be like, and then go back to your friends and go, hey, I can't believe this person said that. Can you believe they said that? That's ridiculous. Instead of seizing that opportunity to actually change something, or actually like at least bring something to someone's attention, or maybe you're wrong. Maybe you don't realize where you're missing something, right? Maybe you're the one who's actually missing out on a perspective that you're misunderstanding them. And that's the other thing, right? Is just recognizing. That was something else that came out of, I think it was the Deep Democracy, or maybe it was one of the other links you sent me, where he talked about, he gave an example of people get to work late and they go, yeah, I'm late because I was stuck in traffic. And it's like, well, no, you're late because you are traffic. Like you literally are part of the problem. And I'm like, oh shit, that's a huge difference. That's a massive difference. Being like, oh, all these people, I can't believe these people are in my way. And it's like, no, you are also doing that. And I thought that was a great aha moment of just like, oh no, I'm also part of the problem. I am not part of the problem. I am the problem. Because that was something else he said previously was, people are willing to say I'm part of the problem. They're not willing to say I am the problem. And that's I thought that was fascinating. It's weird that those little ways of wording it just like all of a sudden go, oh, okay. That makes sense to me. I see now. Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
I think one thing that kind of resonates with me just from your slightly earlier comment there was, I was recently at a conversation that was a dialogue of focus with a bunch of technology entrepreneurs, and the willingness to disagree in that different field was so different than what we see, I think, in the fire and forestry space, where it was a very explicit, the disagreement, and we're having this very active, lively conversation, and people were upfront and say, I deeply disagree with that, or I take issue with that piece, in a way that's so much more explicit than we see, I think, a lot of time in the fire or land management or forestry conversations. And I'm not quite sure why that was, and why how the field that people are in impacts that, but it was a very, very different tenor of conversation, which I thought was really interesting and really drew me back to actually a comment by Tim Urban, who runs an online blog called Wait But Why. And he talks about having a deep disrespect for ideas, but a deep respect for the people that have them. And I think that was a very cool demonstration of that, where no idea is as like we try to identify less through ideas and more through people.
Yeah. And
I think that's something in the land management space and the fire space. These conversations feel so incredibly existential, because sometimes it is around the safety of communities. Mm-hmm. It is around the longevity and sustainability of the landscape and wildlife that we've grown up with. It's around these deep fundamental values that are core to who we are. And I think I'm really curious at the moment on how to inject a little bit of that disrespect for ideas into some of the conversations around this, because it's I think it was just really eye-opening seeing a conversation on technology, which for good reason maybe is less attached to our core identity, but just how impersonal and unoffended people were to be blatantly disagreed with and told that they were wrong. And I really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I love that.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like because there's something about that environment then that's allowing those views to be expressed. So I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in that conversation to see what was happening in the environment that made that possible.
Yeah, I was trying to think about that. The first off, it was our executive director, who's sort of a master at the steep democracy that Robin's speaking about. So she's a brilliant facilitator, and it was really interesting to watch her style. But the other piece that I came away with is just that thought about whether this conversation maybe feels less existential to these individuals than the fire conversation does. And part of my brain thinks yes, but also understanding that that's your career and livelihood and your business, it probably doesn't. So, it's just something I've been ruminating about a little bit. But what you said there, Matt, really reminded me of that conversation where it's just so, people were so explicitly comfortable with disagreement and unattached to their own ideas.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Because it feels like that would take years to create that level of trust and respect to the point where you can just openly disagree with somebody and not have an emotional response to that, right? Like it's.
But it kind of reminds me of like the mentality that you might have in a freshman or first year philosophy class, where it's just these existential ideas up for discussion and yeah, maybe not appropriate in a professional setting, but I really like that mentality to, and really interested in how we can incorporate that more.
It'd be an interesting way to preface every facilitation and just be like, all right, listen, I deeply respect all of you, but I also deeply disrespect a lot of your ideas. That doesn't mean I disrespect. You're like, wait, what? So that's fascinating. That's what we're aiming for, though, right? Is that idea of, disagreeing effectively. I love that. Very, very cool.
Yeah, I think also there's something to be said for some of the tools from the deep democracy method about how do you make it okay to say the no in a dialogue. And this is something that can be injected sort of early on in a gathering and in subtle ways, I think I've noticed, simply by opening a dialogue or a meeting or a conversation with a check-in where people say how they're arriving or how they're feeling, what's going on for them, and hearing all of these different views and getting people used to hearing lots of different perspectives right from the beginning. Like maybe this person was really well rested. Maybe this person is exhausted. And so that's already its own form of no, right? It's a polarity that we see where this can be true in this group and this can be true as well. And so kind of through these subtle ways of asking questions and getting people to say their views, you start to, I think, encourage a culture where we can have difference in our conversation. And then I think also as a facilitator or someone who's leading a conversation or leading a discussion, showing kind of your own version of no within yourself. Because I don't know about you, but I often feel, even on a single issue, I could be, well, I agree with this part of it, but I disagree with this part over here. Or if it's my idea, I might say this 70% of it really makes sense. 30% of it is garbage.
Yeah.
But saying these things out loud, I think, especially as a leader, saying, this is what I see might be good. This is what might be kind of dangerous about this. Yes. And allowing that to just kind of permeate the discussion then makes it safe for other people to say, oh, I feel a little bit that way too. Or, I don't feel that way and this is what I feel instead. And so there are these kind of little ways we can move and practice this so that when we get to the points of big conflict, maybe we've already developed at least a little bit more comfort with the fact that we're going to have difference and we can manage the difference.
Interesting. Because I think about workshops and stuff that I've done, right? And you often start off being like, okay, well, we're going to go around. Everyone says who they are, who they're working for, and what you hope to get out of today. That's very common, right? What do you hope to get out of today? I really like your idea that is about just like, hey, like, how are you feeling today? What was happening to you? Are you well rested? Did you go into this like frustrated because of personal stuff or sad or whatever? Because all of a sudden, I feel like the question of saying, hey, what do you hope to get out of today is a very productive question. It's like, what are we hoping to produce today? Whereas being like, hey, checking in with you, like, where are you at? That's immediately humanizing everybody. It takes you out of the professional space a little bit and into a like, hey, let's remember we're all people and we're all going to be wrong and we're going to have stuff about this. Right. That's right. And let's just remember that. I think that's it's so funny how simple that is, but how I think amazingly effective that must be to just take some of the tension out of the room, especially with parties that have a history.
One of my favorite questions to ask in a check-in is there any part of you that doesn't want to be here? And in the deep democracy kind of style of check-in, you as the leader are the first person to go. So you kind of model the level of vulnerability that you want other people to take, because you can take them there with the fact that you maybe hold a little bit more power in the room. So when you say there's a part of you that doesn't want to be there, you're inviting your own no in the room, and you're making it safe for everybody else to say, I have other things I wish I were doing, or I really don't understand this proposal, or again, I think your idea is garbage, maybe, I don't know. But it just kind of, the power of really good questions can then help move us, I think, to deeper levels of being vulnerable and really communicating our actual thoughts with each other.
I love that, because I think a lot of people would be worried about losing power by showing vulnerability. But I feel like you're right. Like if you were to go, hey, I'm really excited about today's, but I'm also incredibly nervous and I've been stressing about this for 2 months and I'm not entirely sure that I know enough to facilitate this, but I'm going to give it a go because I care about this deeply. Like all of a sudden, that's a response where people go, oh, we're going to real talk right now. Is that what we're doing? We're doing real talk? You're like, yeah, let's start with that. Let's put away our professional selves and real talk, right? So that's fascinating. But so many people would be terrified that like by doing that, they're losing some form of power or you know what I mean? Like there's the ego part or the fear part that's there. But I feel like without modeling vulnerability, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. And I think too, this connects in with sort of the larger question about like, what is the facilitator's role, or what do you need to be thinking about or doing to make these kinds of conversations happen? And of course, yes, there's this whole kind of doing side of strategies and structures, and there are ones out there that are great that James and I use all the time, and we, James, you already dropped one of them in the conversation, Fishbowl. We love that. We love, things from the Liberating Structures suite online, which is a totally free resource out there for people to get, interested in different tools. But there's also this whole being side of a facilitator. And I feel like that is even more important than the doing. It's kind of, how are you showing up in this conversation right now? Are you coming with humility? Are you coming with a sense of what is possible? Are you coming with faith in the people that are at this table with you? Are you coming with a sense of deep love even for the other human beings who are in the room with you? And I think that kind of who we are and how we show up can sometimes move conversations in ways that, it's not about the right tool or the right structure.
Right.
It's just about showing up kind of and doing some real talk in the moment.
So that's a great question, and I'm going to ask it to you, is what is the role of a facilitator then? Because I feel like that's an answer that we need.
James, I'm going to put you on the spot because I feel like I've just been talking a lot. So what's the role of a facilitator in your eye?
Well, Dr. Robin Freeman, I thought you might have been more qualified than me to answer that, but I'll give my best. I think the role of a facilitator is really to hold space for a conversation and to hold space for the conversation that needs to happen, I think is probably the way I would frame it, where often in our dialogues or conversations, we will go in with one idea of what the conversation might be. And if we've done our research well, it's probably a pretty good idea as to what the conversation is, but maybe there's a small piece within that that's really the conflict that needs to happen. Maybe there's a small thread that needs to be pulled. And I think the goal of the facilitator and the goal of an effective facilitator is to make sure that the conversation that happens is the one that needs to happen. And so a key example of this that we talked about earlier might be a conversation where there's no elements of conflict, and it's entirely cordial, and you kind of gloss over the elephant in the room, or it might be a lot smaller than the elephant in the room. But the goal of the effective facilitator is to really be the one to enable that conflict to happen in a productive and respectful and safe way.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires both having trust of the people in the room, the support of the people in the room, but it also requires being incredibly attuned to what's not being said, what is being left out, or what's being danced around. So as one facilitator we worked with said, you don't have to be the expert, but you can't be the slowest person in the room with that conversation. Right. And I think that's really the challenge, is how we can really recognize what isn't being said. So the role of the facilitator, I think, is to make sure that conversation that needs to happens in a safe and respectful and collaborative way. But Robin, please feel free if you think I'm missing anything.
I had a quick brief, just cartoon in my mind as you were saying that I feel like summarized it. And I was like, originally I'm like, yeah, your role as a facilitator is to poke the bear. But no, that's not true. The role of the facilitator is to poke the bear after you've put gloves and a muzzle on it. And so you want the conflict, but you don't want absolute devastation or any actual danger.
I think we also need to poke the right bear.
Right. Okay. There's too many bears. Okay. 10-4.
Yeah. I think also the facilitator is there to make things easy. Your role is really to be the one who makes conversation easy for people in the room. So if they are having a hard time saying what needs to be said, you bring your presence and you bring your tools and your structures to help them say what needs to be said, right? If they are having trouble making a decision about something, you're there to make it easier for them to discuss the different options and to prioritize which one is the best one, right? So it's all, I think a facilitator too is, and you're saying this basically, James, is you're there in kind of a servant leadership role, right? You kind of hold some power in the conversation because of the role of the facilitator, but it's actually not about you at all. It's about making sure that everyone here is served as well as possible in the conversation.
You're a therapist. You're a therapist for a group. You're a group therapist. Honestly, when I think about that, I think about my wife is a psychologist. And when I hear her talk about her job, and she's like, my job is not to provide solutions. My job is to guide people through their own stuff safely and effectively so they can get to where they want to be. Right. And I'm like, oh, that's what a facilitator is too. So very similar, right? Like it's your job. You're guiding people safely through these dialogues so that everybody can get out what they need to get out so that this can be as effective and productive, I guess, as possible, right? And that's really interesting. It's not just social lubricant. It's more than that. It's a guide. It's kind of safety net, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, that's really, really good. I like that.
Yeah, and I think there is an element too, there are so many different parts of facilitation practice that we could talk about, but part of it is too, what structures are you bringing to help the group along, and how are you kind of responding to what the group needs in the moment and shifting structures or ideas or agenda items to help conversation flow in the way that it needs to, and to help people collaborate or see each other's perspectives in a new way. So there is still this kind of element of adapting on the fly and responding to what's going on, which is why, James, your comment about being able to follow the conversation is really important. You have to be tuned in, right? As if we were playing in a jam band. It's still that same element of you're tuning in to what is happening. And then you're also kind of bringing some concrete skills, methods, even just tiny little things. Let's take a break for a moment. Let's talk to a partner about this idea for 5 minutes, and then let's come back and share. And these little things kind of help inject and move the conversation, perhaps in the way that it can be more productive for everyone involved.
Yeah. I just, speaking of taking a break for a moment, I just imagine how often, as professional facilitators, do you guys zone out for a half a minute and all of a sudden it's quiet and you realize it's your turn to do something and you have a little mini existential crisis of like, oh shit, what were we? I'm sorry. I zone. Because that happens to me all the time where I'm like, wait, I was supposed to be paying attention and I wasn't.
I mean, that never happens to us, does it, James? It never happens. Yeah, there's this kind of strange, I don't know if you feel this way, James, so I want to hear what you think. But I feel like when you're facilitating conversation, you're sort of paying attention and listening on two levels. You're paying attention to where the conversation is actually tracking, what people are saying, what the content is, who's talking, who's not talking. You know, you're reading body language, all this kind of stuff. And you're also trying to figure out what's not being said here. What's the next move that helps the not being saidness come out? So you have to be paying attention to kind of verbal conversation and these kind of more subtle reading the room kind of dynamics. And sometimes I find if I'm too much on one level for too long, then you find, oh, I got to go to this other mode of awareness to help me have a fuller picture of what's going on. Does that resonate with you at all, James?
Yeah, I think it does. I find when you're facilitating, it's in a sort of plenary or group session, it's one thing. But trying to sort of keep track of what's going on amongst multiple conversations and multiple perspectives is some of the most active listening I've ever had to do. But it's impossible to keep track of the conversations that are going on amongst 30 people.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a very, to answer your question bluntly, absolutely. I feel that challenge. But I think it's really a matter of trying to be incredibly attuned to, as Robin said, the two levels of the conversation, but really where it's going on the surface and where it's going underneath, and who seems a little bit frustrated or has sort of given up trying to contribute or XYZ. And then also to the point of once that structure falls apart, how are people interacting? How are people talking to each other casually, socially? I think it plays into these conversations so much. So it's a very intense day or two when we're having these conversations because you try to pay attention to so much that's going on. And obviously the challenge is not to lose the plot of the top level conversation when you're trying to pay attention to all these other pieces.
Absolutely. I had a thought about, being in some of these, workshop kind of situations where oftentimes there'll be certain people that kind of dominate the whole thing, right? Like if you have 30 people, you might have 5 people that are doing all the talking, right? How do you have any tools or ideas to help people maybe, because you don't want to single people out who don't want to talk, right? You want to say, hey, so-and-so, we haven't heard from you. Like, what do you think? Because that's terrifying. Someone hasn't been formulating a thought. They have nothing to say. And they're just like, wait, what? So how do you go about pulling those people out of their shell? Because you know that it's important to hear their perspective in a safe way, in a way that's, you know what I mean? They feel comfortable and it feels organic and not like forced from them or pulled from them.
I think people respond differently to different forums and different exercises. And I'm someone that likes to speak up in a big group, but recognizing that other people maybe don't. It's important to have a variety of different kinds of conversations. So that might be partner conversations or pair conversations. That might be table conversations. That might be 1 to 5 minutes of personal thought, and really providing, I think is important to provide opportunities for people's perspectives to filter up. Number one, and to feel like those contributions as table conversations are heard and recognized and legitimized. And then sometimes it's a matter of checking in a little bit. Like if someone's clearly pulling back or withdrawing, like, is there anything we can do to make this environment feel better for you? And then finally, just being very attuned to what's going on, because it is when there's 30 people, people will participate at a different level, and a different level of engagement. So really being conscious as to who is responding to what activity, what exercise, and being willing to be adaptable.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's totally true, James. And I think you can build in these little structures, these little microstructures that allow for more distributed participation between people. Like James already mentioned, you say to folks, all right, everyone, here's the main question. Take 2 minutes right now to just jot down some of your own ideas. Don't talk to anyone else yet. Just be with you. Do kind of an inner dialogue, right?
Yeah. Journal entry.
And then, yeah, exactly. Or draw something, or, because people process information or need to answer questions in different ways. Walk in the room, do whatever you need for a couple of minutes to just kind of sit with this question. Then, go to a partner conversation. It feels often a little bit more safe for folks to share their view with one person instead of the entire room. And then kind of go to your table or 4 people, and then we're going to share all together. So at that point, kind of all of these different conversations are influencing what you hear at the end. I was just recently at a school meeting, and it was this exactly what you're describing, Matt, where the people got up and they said what the topic of the conversation was going to be, and then they gave no structure for how it was going to proceed. And the same 5 people just kept talking for an hour and a half, even though there were 40 of us in the room.
Yeah.
If they had just done, here's the main question, what if we give you an index card and you jot down your top 3 ideas and then talk, you can just imagine the wealth of information that would have come from that kind of small switch of structure. Because open discussion, it can be chaos. Then the other thing I think that's helpful to kind of keep in mind too, is that you want to be able to encourage distributed participation because the system as a whole will be healthier if we hear from more parts of the system.
Absolutely.
It's this idea that nobody has a monopoly on the truth. And so we actually need as many people as possible sharing their point of view so that we can make good decisions. Because otherwise we don't see the whole picture, and no one will ever see the whole picture. So I think encouraging as well that your part of the puzzle is really important. And this has been something that for me has been kind of personally a growth area in wildfire, because I came into the wildfire space at first believing I had nothing to contribute, right? I'm not a firefighter. I don't have a background in land management. I don't have a background in emergency management. But it was through dialogue spaces where people said, all the points of view are really valuable here. Then I realized, maybe the fact that I'm coming with a beginner's mind, or I don't understand all of these concepts, could be something that helps the group.
Yep.
So I think it's also facilitators or leaders of conversations have opportunities then to invite participation. And then you end up kind of having a much better picture of what's going on and what's possible.
Totally. That makes sense. Because I feel like a lot of these roundtable discussions, you end up, they're just being repeats of each other, right? Like you just keep repeating the same things. Maybe you get a little bit, but because there's no fresh new perspective, like, hey, I don't really know what you mean when you say this. It forces people to reflect and look at it again. And then you go, oh, wait, we missed something. And yeah, it's those fresh ideas, fresh eyes. Like, you really do need to mix it up, stir the pot a bit, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. And that's something that we do quite often in sessions that we host, is that we intentionally use methods that get people talking to different people. So they might start with this one partner or with this one table, but then 5 minutes later, we're going to say, move to a different partner, move to a different table, so that you can get those conversations happening so that it doesn't feel stale, like you're saying, Matt.
Yeah, speed dating ideas. Yeah. Love it. That's great. That's really, really cool. Yeah, it's funny how just being creative and just being just trying to create like little smaller subgroups and safe spaces for people to start sharing, might allow those ideas to filter up, if not verbally, then in written format or something. And that allows for maybe the folks who aren't going to speak up for their idea to become a main event that is being discussed amongst the larger group, right? And so that's cool. I really, really like that. So I feel like we need to do, if not a summary or this whole point of this was to do like a how-to, right? Like how to, so people are going to walk away from this having lots to think about. How do I be more reflective? How do I go into conversation or into dialogue with the right frame of mind to help people come out of their shells and to not be judgmental and to all these types of things, right? So can we start to discuss, maybe give a few ideas for where to start, where people can start with this, and some ideas for going forward or that kind of thing. And I can always provide resources in the show notes for people to dive deeper into it. But I just want to provide some walk-away material. What's the homework that we could start with now for people that aren't familiar with it and have just listened to this conversation? So, maybe we'll start with Robin. Like, I don't know if you have some simple ideas that maybe can help people start down this path.
Yeah, I do. And they come from a variety of different places. So it's maybe a bit of a hodgepodge, but I would say the first thing is don't be afraid to try something and to try something small. I think sometimes people can feel intimidated by saying, but I'm not a facilitator. I don't have training. It's okay to start with a very small thing. So one small thing might be, like we already talked about, Matt, start a meeting with a check-in. Ask folks a question about how they're arriving today. Use that opportunity, that first 5 minutes or 10 minutes to build that kind of human-to-human connection. That's a really simple thing that we can do when we're hosting conversations. I think something else that we can tune into is finding ways to get all of the views out on the table, right? So it's using little structures like we've talked about, where maybe you write things down first, then talk with someone, then talk in a larger group, and then let's all share back some of the things that we heard. What were the insights that came from that conversation? And let's write those things down. Let's have them all out on the table so that we can have wiser decisions. We can have conversations where there are just more perspectives present. I think a third thing you can do is make saying the no okay. And we talked about how that might be you as the leader being transparent about your own misgivings about a plan or your own kind of fears about a certain decision, and make that okay for other people to also say, you can ask, does anyone else feel a little bit like this is not the right direction for us to be going in? Raise your hand if you do, right? So there are these kind of little ways that we can make saying the no okay for folks, so that we can maybe, if there's going to be a conflict down the road, we've already made it kind of part of our culture that it's okay for us to have different views.
Yes.
And I think maybe the last thing I would maybe give as a thing to take away with is that conflict's okay. It's okay. And tension is there. And the reason that tension is there is that there's some kind of deeper wisdom that we can maybe tap into. And so we don't need to shy away from it. We can suspend our own judgment for that moment and try to really listen to what someone else is saying and see what kind of insights we get about ourselves and our own views in that kind of conversation. So those are my four tips.
I love it. No, we need that. We need it. I need that, right? Like, we have these huge conversations that are so deep and there's so much going on and it's so interesting and intriguing. But at the end of the day, you walk away and you go, wait, what am I supposed to do again? Like, I need it summarized at the end to be like, oh, right, yeah.
Totally.
And then it's kind of like it's kind of like your favorite song, right? Like if I asked you to just like start singing the words to Free Falling, like you can't really do it. You might get a couple things, but if the song starts, you got them all. You got it. It's all there. So we just need a couple pointers to be like, okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. I feel like that does a good job of summarizing all the key points of this conversation. So, James, what do you have to add? What do you got for people to help them walk away from this and become effective facilitators and communicators and to make a difference out there?
Yeah, I think for me, I came into this role almost entirely new at this. So I can speak a little bit from kind of the learner's mindset. Here in the first piece that I would highlight is just kind of like Robin said, paying attention to where in your life this might be useful, where in your life you see conversations that are stagnant or reframing could help, and really think about the framing of these conversations, how we have them. So just that awareness piece, I think, is really helpful. And even after this podcast, sit down and think about 2 or 3 areas of your life where you're seeing the stagnation, where it might help. I think, like Robin said too, being willing to try things is really, really helpful. What's hard though is to know what to try. And so there's a few good resources that I'm sure we'll add in the show notes, but a couple that I would recommend are Liberating Structures, which has this whole list of facilitation techniques online that you can look up. There's videos of how to apply it. There's a guidebook of when to use different techniques. So I think that's been really helpful. And the other one that I've actually found incredibly helpful for learning some of these skills is actually new AI like ChatGPT. I can often describe a situation and say which of the liberating structures might be useful to try in this situation, or what are some facilitation techniques that might be worth trying. So from a real starting points for people that are just looking to try and learn these tools, try and break down some conversations a little bit, that's a great way, because it'll just give you a bit of insight as to avenues that might work. And they won't always be grounded. They won't always be the optimal piece, but for just something to start with, something to try, something to learn with, it's actually a really, really great tool, because it'll suggest an idea. You can talk a little bit about how you might want to structure it, and it'll bounce some ideas back. So just for getting that early stage guidance, I would recommend that. And then the other resource I would recommend is Robin and myself. Like, we are speaking this language a lot, and we do a lot of this work. So if this is something that interests people, please reach out to, if you're looking for more resources. That's something we can definitely support in.
I love that.
Can I add a bonus tip? Those are all so good. And it made me think that, I think all of us already possess at least one big skill that we can bring to a conversation. So you're not starting from nothing.
Yeah.
It might be your sense of humor that helps folks feel connected. It might be the patience that you have with people. It might be your ability to just kind of jump into any conversation. There are these kind of big skills that we have as human beings that are always so helpful in making people feel comfortable and in getting a group to move forward. So I'd also say, just don't think that you have to add tons of skills to your toolkit. Tap into what you already have and who you already are and how you show up, and use those strengths when you're facilitating these conversations. And a place that I find is really helpful to do it is in your family.
Yeah.
you know, so you don't have to try these things even in a professional context if that feels a little scary or risky at the moment. Try it out at the dinner table tonight. You can say, this thing is happening. What does everyone else think? Or you can say, I'm thinking that bedtime kids should be at 7, but let's hear all the views.
Yeah.
So there are ways you can kind of experiment a little bit, because our families are our little communities and ecosystems as well, our personal relationships, our friendships.
I love that. Yeah, I like that. This is all just amazing. Like, I just think about all the ways in which you can apply this to your life, to your family, to your friends, and just like work your way up from there, build the confidence slowly so that you can bring this to the next big discussion you have. in the workplace or wherever it might be, right? Like I think these are all very human ideas that just will make you a good friend too, make you a good person, not just a good employee or a good representative of sustainable values or whatever it might be, right? So, I really appreciate all this. I think this is fantastic. Thank you to both of you. Do you have any final thoughts? I feel like we've wrapped it up quite well and leave people with some homework and some ideas to go forth with.
Thanks a lot for having us on and letting us share a little bit about the work that we do. I think it's really exciting to reach a broader audience and to kind of, like I said, have one of these more abstract conversations around the work we do, which we don't always get to have too. So that's always really enjoyable.
Yes. You're welcome.
Yeah, similarly, thank you, Matt, for the invitation to go deep on some of these topics and to just see where the conversation takes us. I am really grateful for the opportunity and look forward to connecting maybe with some of you listeners out there and continuing the conversation and all of our learning together how to do dialogue well.
Mm-hmm. I think you guys offering up your, for people to reach out to you is huge because I think people, they want that, right? Like this is the reason I started the podcast is because I wanted to reach out to people like yourselves and be like, I want to learn from you. What do I do? How do I do this? And like, that's a huge opportunity. And if it's going to help people increase their confidence or they have specific questions, like that's going to be such a useful guide rather than them going on Google and trying to, self-curate their own lessons, right? So that's fantastic. I appreciate you offering up those yourselves as resources because that's gonna make a huge difference. So thank you. I feel like I could have this conversation forever and I didn't want to end it, but I feel like it has to end at some point. So I feel like it was timed right. So thanks again. This is awesome. I can't wait to share it and I can't wait to keep up with you guys.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. This is one that I'm going to be touching back on regularly to remember all these tools and tricks to help me be a better communicator. This is going to make you not just a better professional, but a better person, a better friend, a better spouse, a better parent, just a better human being, right? Why not? I can't wait. Thank you to Robin and thank you to James for coming on, giving me your time to do this. I really, really appreciate it. And you can reach out to me at YourForest Podcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to Robin and James. Their information is out there on the SFU website. Tons of links in the show notes. And make sure to rate and review. Thanks a lot. Catch you next time. Take it easy.